So in the actual Thuringian State Archives, there's a single piece of paper with 5 tunings on it. It was discovered by the organist in Altenburg, which is also an organ built by Trust, THG Trust. Also, it's a brilliant instrument, although in equal temperament now. And the one page, which was copied by somebody else, it doesn't say what the 5 temperaments are, but these were submitted by Trust himself to suggest a future tuning for the Altenburg organ before they actually built it. Now, the first one of the 5 is his. That's the one they used. And it was Theophil Hanke, who basically is the organist in Waltershausen right now, the chief organist.
Yes.
He has another title too, I believe.
The cantor.
He's a cantor. And he was actually getting his dissertation in Altenburg. And so he came across this one page, and he communicated it to Waltershausen Bau.
Orgelbau.
Orgelbau. This is the building company. I guess it's right across the street. That basically made their careers, which is repairing Thuringian organs. That's what they do. They made their careers on this. This is the tuning right here, THD Trust Well Temperament. And it starts just on C, like all the others. I think the second one was the actual Forner Well Temperament. And the third, fourth, and fifth were all by Neidhart. So I think Neidhart was the actual winner. But it wasn't Neidhart equal temperament. It was a Neidhart unequal temperament. He had many different temperaments, Neidhart. And he would split them up based on whether he thought they were for courts, they were for villages. I believe it was a village tuning. It got replaced by equal temperament.
Because the organ player at the time wanted equal temperament. That's the
Yeah, he really did. And you know, it turned out that the players, future players in the churches, were probably the majority who wanted equal temperament. And I think a lot of these guys had had perfect pitch. Perfect pitch at that time was unanchored. There were no absolutes. There were no agreed upon, 440 is A. That didn't exist. That came later with Hummel. So instead, could you actually show some of the different keys, Witold?
Sure.
So these are how the keys come out differently. Like, look at it. No one's going to write in C sharp major unless you're doing a well-tempered clavier, right? So that would be what the key would sound like. And you have to put in your head hundreds. That's equal temperament. So you want to measure it against an ephemera, let's say, of hundreds. So you see, if you're starting on C sharp, the D is going to be just a little higher at 104. If you're on E flat, it's even higher, 206. But if you get to E, it's actually the same as modern equal temperament. So, throw away your expectations and scroll through a few more. Just look at how different they are. All right, so now we have E against F. E would be a good guitar key, right? F major. So F to A, 393. So it's a little bigger than just. Remember, just would be bumpy. I don't have perfect pitch, so I can't even tell you what the F is. And we're not even talking about A415, A440, all these different kinds of things. But, let's say we're going, that's equal. Now I flattened it, maybe about 14 cents to be just. But look at the subtlety. So those are all different kinds of choices. And so, those are colorings. Those are like slight differences, note to note, only in the sense that you're starting on a different note. We could call that tonicization, where you take a note, doesn't matter what it is, and you create an environment that it has the role of a fundamental, a tonic. But it's really ephemera, really, because it's the same 12 notes, but you start somewhere else, and all of a sudden you have more than 12 intervals. Hey, look, if you take one interval, let's say major third, and you have it equal between two whole steps. If I take that middle, let's say I hold up my fingers like this. If I take that middle and I move that middle finger slightly to one side, where we used to have two intervals that were identical, we now have two different intervals, right? Now they're the same, and now there's two different ones. So that's how you get more intervals. And composers know this. And so what you do is you turn the keyboard into an instrument with the expressiveness of a violin, right? Because you can make one note higher and another note lower just by your choice of which note you use or which key you use. So you have different sentiments, different moods. So it's not just the well-tempered one mood. You get lots of different moods. Okay. So I would say, Witold, at this time, go back to non-share screen. And I'll prep you now for the next piece, which will be the toccata and, the Passacaglia and fugue in C minor. Now, everybody's got a sense of C minor probably from Beethoven, right? C minor's got a certain feel to it. This is the C minor out of Werkmeister. Oh, why did I say Werkmeister? THG Well Temperament. This is more microtonal than Werkmeister because Werkmeister has so many pure fifths in it. How many fifths do we have in THG Trust?
I can check.
All right, this is my new suggestion of a new ephemera. So a Passacaglia is a repeat of a bass melody.
We have 7 different fifths.
Thank you. So you have a bass melody that is going to recur. That's a Passacaglia. Brahms loved that. Yeah. And so I used to think, this Passacaglia, which I couldn't even tell was microtonal because it's so subtle and because I didn't expect it. I really didn't expect Waltershausen to be like incredible gold mine. And so I, dun, 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 gosh, I don't want to hear that over and over again in equal temperament, which it's not. But it was so like embossing, so imprinting, so powerfully, creating footprints in the snow that I started to realize on further listenings that he doesn't use the Passacaglia and your mind produces it. It's actually not heard. He's not playing it.
Yeah, it's.
But it goes on.
After hearing it a few.
Yeah, if
times.
that's not ephemera, Witold, what is? Right? And if that's not ephemera, doesn't it show that Bach completely understands the principle? And is that maybe part of the principle of Passacaglia? To free up literally the feet, because the feet are playing the Passacaglia. Bach was great with his feet. Okay, we might as well say it. His son Carl Philipp Emanuel was terrible. Never used his feet. But to his credit, he can tune for his father. Yep. And I don't think his father let anybody tune for him. And when he tuned on harpsichord, he was said to do it in 15 minutes. Turns out that Werkmeister 3 only takes 15 minutes to tune. Just saying. Just saying. And then also, if you think of the, we'll talk about that later. Let's just go right now, if we can, to the Toccata and Fugue in C minor. Now, C minor is not, it's no
Passacaglia
D
and
minor.
fugue.
It's no D minor. Okay, it's not the greatest, it's not the closest to just anymore. Just meaning, like harmonic relationships. It's now darker. Ephemeral wise. You heard the Waltershausen Miracle. That was Hans-André Stamm playing the Waltershausen organ in the chapel in THG Well Temperament. And before you ask, it turns out that Johann Sebastian Bach was personal friends with Tobias Heinrich.
Gottfried Trust, exactly.
Gottfried
And he
Trust.
played on his instruments and also said that he is very fond of them.
You could go further and say, you see those pedals? You see that footwork? That was written for a Trust organ. In the mind of Bach, you would need the range that that pedal range has to play these pieces.
And keep in mind that Christian Forner and also Tobias Heinrich Gottfried Trost, according, for example, to Heinke, is one of those organ builders who extended the pedal range in organ instruments.
Yes, so this family legacy actually is famous for that. And by the way, it all connects with the Halberstadt organ, of all places, right, in Halberstadt. This is where the keyboard design that we're talking about, that you saw just now, comes from. And it comes from a tuning of Pythagorean tuning, where it then gradually becomes chromatic. And it's a very interesting story, but the organs switch. You know, they go in and out. They're not the same organ.
But the keyboard layout stays the same, 2 and 3.
Yeah. Well, the 2 and 3.
Yeah, the opposite.
Yeah, not the diatonic 2 and 3.
Yes.
And I don't want to go by color, because the color could be inverted. The color is not the issue. So it's just the patterning. And look at the patterning we just heard with the Waltershausen organ. I mean, I don't know if there's anybody who would say you don't like it. Nobody said that in any of the comments of the over 1 million people responding. Nobody has said that. Everybody can go find it, by the way. You know, just Google, you know, just write in YouTube the words Waltershausen, like Waltershausen.
Yep.
You know, and Bach.
And it's up there.
Yeah, it's going to come right away. Just like finding us at Microtonal Vision is that simple. Just type in Microtonal Vision. So now that's so intense what we just heard. I mean, it's just so powerful. You think of all of Bach's works, you know, there's so many great pieces. But, you know, physicalness of what we just heard, like we were in the church.
Yeah, especially on this instrument. It's so overwhelming, you know, and it's like physicalness that you also experience while listening, this push back, and it's incredible.
So I think now let's pull back in, and we're going to listen to Rebecca Pechefsky. She's going to play the Prelude in F major, the most just major key, from Book 2 of the Well-Tempered Clavier. And let me just say about the Well-Tempered Clavier, this is a almost scientific composition of prelude and fugue twice. You have to go around 12 times, major and minor. That's book 1. You wait 20 years before you write the next book, where you go and do the same thing all over again with new music. Why? Why bother? So basically, there are 39 intervals in Werkmeister 3, where there were 108. We have 39. That's still 39 is a lot more than 12. It's more than 3 times. So now we have to go around 12 and then 12 again, major and minor, because there's so many of them. And sometimes you start the interval from the top. Sometimes you do a kind of an ornamentation on it, so you can't tell. It's a trill. You know, there's so many ways to start, but, you know, for Bach, I did an analysis. I think the first interval is really indicative of the well temperament, because, as we say, Werkmeister 3 does have pure fifths. 8 of them are pure. Oh, that's a just fifth, 3/2, 701.955 cents, or 702 if you want to integer it. So now I checked all the pieces I could figure out by Bach that were well known. Of course, there's tons of, 100 cantatas and lost music and all kinds of things. But I checked all the big ones, the Brandenburgs, all the well-tempered clavier preludes and fugues, the opening interval only. And you know what I found? And this is published in a book called Bach and Tuning. It's published in Germany, actually. Peter Lang Verlag. If you want to check the just intervals, again, there's 8 possible pure fifths and fourths. He doesn't use them. It's the well-tempered clavier, so he doesn't use them. He doesn't want to use the intervals that are beatless, that are just meaning they have a lock on them that almost takes you away from the melody, because he's like ruthlessly melodic. Bach is the last of the great contrapuntalists. It's melody on top of melody on top of melody. There's almost never a note just for harmony. And when you get a note that's just for harmony, you play it melodically. I mean, everything is melodies. So let's go to the F major prelude, just that, with Rebecca Pechefsky. You can go to it any time now, Witold. And this is on Bandcamp, as so many of our recordings are, that you can find. Just go to johnnyreinhard.bandcamp.com. This is the album it came from. And here you could hear, I love that word, is spelled differently, but it's the same word. Here you can hear that when a phrase comes in on a different note, it's not identical in shape. So like the use of Werkmeister 3 tuning makes the lines etched so that they want to be heard more distinguishably than you would normally hear it in equal temperament, where it's heard as chords. You know, in a counterpuntal sense, you're hearing melodies, not chords. So it's a kind of you're hearing simultaneities, is the way we would call it, from a melodic perspective. So now that we brought it back to the simple F major, though it's book 2, she's already had over 20 years experience, you know, with all the keys in a scientific way, like nobody else on the planet. I mean, there's one or two others actually, but you know, nobody at this stature. And then do it again with all new music. I mean, it seems superfluous to say, you know, I'm just doing it for my students, or, you know, I expect to hear all 48 someday, or, you know, and you know, the preludes do more of the magical musical stuff, the intonation. The fugues, they go faster. There, fugue means to follow. It's basically, you know, it's so perpetual that you don't really lock, at least, you know, I don't think you lock into it the same way. So I'm going to go to the next piece for just the prelude. It's a chromatic prelude. Now, I say it's chromatic because Bach says it's chromatic. It's the only piece on the planet that Bach wrote that has the word chromatic in the title.
Chromatic fantasy.
And it's a fantasy. It's really a kind of a prelude, because there is a fugue that follows it.
Yeah, it's a fugue, right.
But it's not a prelude. Okay, it's a fantasy. When is a prelude a fantasy? Let me ask. Go ahead, tell me. So it's really hard to distinguish a fantasy from a prelude. So I don't, you know, it's just because it's so unique. How many pieces have the word fantasy by Bach? I don't know. But there's only one with chromatic. So now, and you can analyze this piece where it doesn't leave D minor. Again, D minor, of course, right? D minor is the key for measurement. So if you're going to do a chromatic fantasy, it might as well be in D minor, right? And then it doesn't really have to modulate. Every chord that you're going to analyze as a chord, he may not have, but we analyze it as a chord. We've learned recently that you can analyze things all kinds of different ways, but it doesn't mean it's accurate. And it doesn't mean it tells you what it's supposed to. It could actually put you in the wrong place. So it's nice for the accuracy and to understand it the way they understood it, the way people at the time. I know it's a challenge, but this is part of the fun, is to put yourself, that's what we do partly when we listen to music from the past, is we put ourselves back in time. You know, we put ourselves into this space. Think about it. Back then, there's no recording, so the chances of even hearing this music is so rare. You know, to be lucky that the one or two times a piece is played, you're there to hear it, that you're allowed in, right? How many people are allowed in? You have to know somebody. That's to be, you have to have connections, be lucky. And talk about ephemera, you got to be able to keep that memory of what you heard in your head so exactly that if you're going to talk about it to other people, you got to be sure you remember what you heard, that it's actually accurate. We know how difficult that is. So just imagine how difficult it was back then when there's no recordings. So with that in mind, let's go to the quietest instrument. Some say his favorite, some being Carl Philipp Emanuel, his son, his second oldest son. He said this is his favorite. But you know what? I'll tell you why it's his favorite. I mean, I'll give you a good reason. He had lots of clavichords when he died in his home. He was giving them to students. Why would you use the clavichord? Why? It's so soft. It's not for an audience. It's for an audience of one, the player. And then there's something called Beibungen. Now, Beibungen means that the weight of your finger can press on the string and make the pitch change. Or how does that happen? You can control the individual weights of your fingers on the notes to color even further than the temperament, to emotionally make it even more intense. But that's not the reason. The reason is it's so soft you can play at night. You don't disturb the neighbors. And it's cheap, very inexpensive. And it's a great way to have money as a side hustle. You know, you rent these out. So you just start collecting them, rent them out. And it's a great way to teach tuning, an even better way. And now just the use of Beibungen means that the organ in Waltershausen is more understandable. You know, Bach also wrote music for equal fretted instruments. So, and you know, I would say also composers wrote music for the future to perform. Bach didn't even think of his future, and he almost disappeared if not for Felix Mendelssohn. But still, I try to imagine these things. I go into like different scenarios and then come back out. Go in, go back out. And I test the waters. And I know Witold does the same thing because we've been doing this together for a year now through Microtonal University. You can all find out about that. Just contact us. But now we're going to hear Igor Kipnis play the Chromatic Fantasy in D minor on clavichord. I don't know if he wants to take any liberties with his Beibungen. It may just be that in his era, as like one of the early music harpsichordists that was doing different tuning systems out of 12 since Landowska. Yeah, since then, you know, she was equal. But then since then, they started to do different tunings. And Kipnis actually called me on the radio in New York during one of these shows on Christmas Day, saying how much he enjoyed it and he was listening to his own performance. And then he and I actually worked together on his encyclopedia of keyboards, where I submitted an article on the amplified clavichord, in this case an invented instrument by Ivor Darg in California. So it's in there. And, you know, then he passed away soon after that. There's no videos of him playing that I could find. But let's hear his Chromatic Fantasy in D minor on clavichord in Werkmeister 3 tuning. And so there you heard lots of five, of five, of five at the very end. I mean, I guess, I can't retroactively focus you on the ephemera that just passed, but these dominant seven chords, if you analyze it that way, or five of fives, they each have a different intervallic relationship. So they're like splashes of paint where different color combinations are used each time. So it's like da da dum prata, da da dum prata. It's like different nasal prata, and it's without trying to be too silly. It basically is giving you as much coloration with microtones as possible. After hearing that, I just can't imagine why you would want to hear it in equal temperament. Because it's like, okay, take out the color. Okay, black and white. It's a negative. It's not the full piece. So, if there was ever a piece of music by Johann Sebastian Bach that cries out for well temperament, and I don't know how many other well temperaments you want to try out besides Werkmeister 3. There's a Werkmeister 4, but it was a substitute for something else that came before it. And I think, now I think is the time to talk about it, Witold. This is Christian Forner came before it.
Yep.
And Christian Forner, he did publish a book about stuff that came out in Berlin, but nobody has it. He was an organ builder. And I've come to realize Werkmeister was not an organ builder. He was an organ examiner. It's quite different. It's easier to criticize pipe building when you've never made a pipe. And with the tuning on the organ, I mean, why aren't we talking about tuning on harpsichord? I mean, we do, but it's the organ that everybody wrote about because it took more than a week to tune an already existing organ. Imagine how much time it took to start from scratch. So if you start from scratch, it's easily 2 years. And there's some sad stories, like, you had Trust, THG, with this great Waltershausen organ, but he never finished it.
Yep, because he didn't get paid.
You had an organ finished. You had another organ finished, though, by Christian Forner that never got used. I mean, the whole organ that his great-nephew wrote about, Johann Caspar Trust the Younger, who eventually actually became the chief organist in Halberstadt, which was an organ that was constantly kept in tune by, drumroll,
Christian Forner.
Christian Forner.
And yet,
Christian Forner.
the Younger took his possession after his father, Johann Caspar Trust the Elder.
Yes, that's how the whole family starts. Christian Forner he never had children. So he had a sister. his sister got married to the mayor of Wetten, who happened to be his teacher on organ building. A mayor who is an organ builder in a city, Wetten, that became known for future kings of all kinds of countries, including Poland, in Europe. All right, let's go back. So Christian Forner, he marries into the family. They have this son, and the son is, no, they don't have a son. Take it back. They have a daughter. See, I caught you. They have a daughter, and she marries Johann Caspar Trost, who's then we're going to call the elder. In history, they get mixed up. You can't tell the father from the son. We worked very hard to separate them.
Yes.
And so, even the younger could be, other names, or the elder could be, the senior. I mean, there were other ways to separate them, but history doesn't do it very well. So it takes a study of it and to get into the psychology of it, to know who's who. For example, Witold and I uncovered that a rumor had been started that Andreas Werkmeister had studied with Johann Caspar Trost.
But we don't
And that
know
has
which,
been,
because sources don't even mention, was it the younger, the elder, or just Johann Caspar Trost?
You forgot, Witold. It's neither.
Because it's neither, exactly.
Because it's neither. The elder came, we got this from, an actual book about Kedlingberg, where Werkmeister used to live, that said that Johann Caspar Trost, this would be the elder based on the other information they gave. He actually had to adjudicate the organ playing skills of Andreas Werkmeister for the sister of Frederick the Great. And believe me, I am not making this up. This is true. So that's the end of him. He never taught anything in Kedlingberg. But his brother, not his brother, why do I do that?
Son.
His son, his son. Of course it's his son, not his brother. He had a brother who was an organ builder who studied with Christian Forner. That's
and
true.
whose son is Tobias
now-
Heinrich Gottfried Trost.
Also true.
Yeah.
You really got to follow this,
Yeah.
I tell you. And that's why you should read our article. We have an article. It's available for no money to academia.edu is where you find it. You can find it on Google, I bet. And
Yep.
you just write, well, temperament before Werkmeister. And then hopefully it's readable. It's got the whole actual treatise in it that Johann Caspar Trost Jr. wrote in honor of his great uncle Christian Forner, who had just built this organ in Altenburg.
No, in Weissenfels.
In Weissenfels, thank you, in Weissenfels. And this organ in Weissenfels, apparently the chapel never opened. And by the time it opened, they had changed the tuning twice. So it's only in the treatise. Now, this is new information. The treatise is discovered by Franz Josef Ratter. And Ratter not only discovers the treatise, and nobody knows this, now you do, now everybody knows. Ratter also does the tuning of Christian Forner. And the tuning of Christian Forner, you cannot discern by your eyes. You know, it's about, now we're going to go by, this is what we believe. It's vibrations per second. There's a tuning table. It's vibrations per second for major thirds, not the fifths. And then the major thirds will have a plus or a minus with a symbol of, either a upside down V or, the caret, whatever.
By the way, the same system
which have famous,
as used by Werkmeister later on to show his tunings.
Yes. Yeah, it's part of the organ building guilds, that's what they use. It's about, really what it means, it's a description of squeezing the top of the pipe. right? Open or closed, open or closed. So, you know, but it turns out to be plus or minus. It shows you direction of the vibrations. And then the vibrations are listed 1, 2, and 3. So is there 1 vibration per second? Is it 2? Is it 3? And that's that way you figure out Christian Forner's tuning. And until Witold and I, no one had ever really, well, how should we put it? Other people came up with other systems, including Heinke. You know, including the guy who found the paper that had the tuning they used in Waltershausen. The second tuning was Forner. So it's there, the same one that's in the treatise, but how to interpret it. So thankfully, the Waltershausen Orgelbau, the organization that rebuilt the instrument by 1998, I think they took 4 years. With the information from Heinke, they actually did the right tuning. So it's kind of nice that it is the tuning of THG Well Temperament, which was absolutely missing from history. It didn't show up. It had no name. It's just a piece of paper. It's in the archive. People don't even believe that's true. Some people will even attack that as a myth. No, this is true. This is true. Don't be a Rallo.
State Archive, yeah.
The Phrygian State Archive, that's right. It's an actual piece of history. So for those people who believe, mistakenly I think, that unless it's on paper it never existed, see, every musician knows this is not true, then this is real. This is on paper. So this is on paper. This is real. This is part of history. Whether you've paid attention to it or not, it's real. Read the article, Well Temperament Before Werkmeister, to find out recovery history. That's what they call it. That's the archivists call it, recovery history. And now, as part of recovery history, I'd like to play a piece of music by Heinrich Bach, right? This is an uncle, great uncle, I think, of Johann Sebastian Bach, and the father of Johann Nicholas Bach, the guy who beat Neidhart in that competition in 1707 in Jena, because his tuning was more musical, meaning it was an equal temperament. It had more naturalness to it. There's no equalness in nature. We all know this. So, if you want to really force fit Bach into 12 equal, he's great. It's got substance. He fits. You can do him in 7 equal. It'll work. You can make it work. He's really good. That would be tough, though. All right. So now Heinrich Bach's piece for organ in Arnstadt. This is the guy who set the job up for Johann Sebastian Bach. He set it up with his son, Johann Christoph Bach, in Eisenach. This is all in the family. And he knew that J.S. Bach was now orphaned. Became orphaned. And he lived, with his brother, and then he went to Lubeck. He went to a city near Lubeck that's a salt city. And it was a boy soprano. That's why, I think to say that someone's a friend of Bach is important. I don't think he had a lot of friends. And I know that he had relatives he pretended were dead. He pretended his brother was dead to get a larger, I was saying this on Christmas, to get a larger inheritance from the Lammerhart family in Erfurt. And I guess the effort was worth it because he got the money. He had another brother who played flute in the Swedish army in Istanbul, who had studied with Quantz, and he had no contact with him. But he did have a friend in this city. That city is escaping me right now, but it's in the north of Germany. And he called him my brother through his whole life. This was like one of his best friends, a lawyer. So, it means something to be his friend, I'll tell you. But anyway, let's get back to Heinrich Bach. He has a D sharp in this piece. So that causes discord, right? D sharp cannot be in mean tone unless you have split keys, and he didn't, right? Split keys, whether on flute or keyboard or any other instrument. So there's a D sharp. That means it needs well temperament. But here's the quandary. What well temperament to use before Werkmeister? Werkmeister doesn't start till 1681. This piece is earlier.
Go figure.
Well, Witold, what do?
We use Forner well temperament.
We use Forner well temperament.
Was before.
And that's Rotte's tuning. The same man. By the way, I can tell you that Joseph Franz Rata, who is retired now, has been on the phone with Witold. And he's read the paper. And he supports the paper.
And he's incredibly happy to hear the tuning put on an instrument, and then in a musical context, he says that those semitones and whole tones together sound beautifully and very expressive.
I don't even know if you can call them semitones and whole tones anymore, because
when
you say that, I know, but when you say that to the modern world, don't you, even me, I go right into equal temperament in my mind.
Yeah, but it's not here.
It's not. So semitone is a new meaning. Whole tone is a new meaning. Certainly there is a sense of that, but as you saw in Waltershausen tuning, there's 12 different semitones.
Precisely.
Each semitone is a different size. I know, isn't that funny? I once got kicked out of a law firm for saying that to a lawyer because he didn't understand it, and lawyers don't appreciate not understanding things, especially when they think they're the expert in the field. But anyway, moving on, let's hear your performance that you play as a harpsichordist, not an organist. Yeah, we weren't able to swiftly put an organ in Forner well temperament in time for this broadcast, so we're happy.
Harpsichord will do, I guess.
Harpsichord will do. Get a nice color on the instrument, get a good recording in the room, make sure. And you did it. And thank you, Witold. So you ready? Anytime you want to transfer it, and then you want to show anything with it, you're welcome to. You know where the treasure lies.
Sure.
And here, there's something else I noticed, Witold, that's beautiful,
Mm-hmm.
is that when you hear it again, any of these unequal performances, you're guaranteed to hear something new. And in equal temperament, that's partly true, but not true in the same way.
No, I agree.
Have you heard that point before?
No, but I agree from my experience. You hear with an equal temperament, you hear in it something different. But when you hear a performance in an equal temperament, you maybe hear something new, musical wise, coming from the player. But in terms of like harmony and how it lines up, it's pretty the same, I must say.
How about this? There's another angle. The tempo is dictated by the temperament.
Oh yeah, obviously it affects how you phrase.
You say obviously, but it's not obvious to people who have not done this.
True. Of course it's not.
So if I hear bum bee ba ba bum ba ba bum 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 bum, that's the tempo. Because I sang that in the right temperament. But if it's equal temperament, the result is it's faster. If every key is the same, just on a higher or lower pitch, then it's the virtuosity that you're really listening for, because there's no variation other than whatever you feel because it starts on a different note, just because of the range, which is completely, separate. So now, after hearing that, where it fits beautifully, it takes a D sharp, makes it possible.
Yes.
And there's no other well temperament known at the time. So that is the only well temperament. Forner didn't have variations of them. That was it. And Forner was in charge of the Halberstadt organ. He was the tuner.
And the main technician.
The official technician. So what does that mean? That means he snuck Johann Caspar Traust the Elder into Halberstadt, as he once did into Witten. And he basically got him in as a lawyer. He found legal jurisprudence interests for him. And then from there he said, oh, by the way, he plays the organ.
So give him the job.
Yeah, I'm in charge of tuning the organ. I'm going to decide the tuning. He's going to follow my lead. I got him the job. He better. So he comes in. It's his nephew, after all. He's Uncle Christian. So the nephew is now the chief organist of the St. Martini Kirche
Yes.
of Halberstadt. And when he dies, his son takes over. And when his son dies, the younger, who do you think takes over after he dies? Don't say it, Witold. It's my turn. Andreas Werkmeister. Look at that. How clean. How connected. That's clear. That's not interpretation. That's the facts. No alternative facts. Alternative tunings, but not alternative facts. So now we're going to hear what can you do with Bach in a transcription. We're going to hear the Violin Sonata number 1, BWV 1001, that's high up there in the collection of Bach works, BWV, on the guitar, in a re-fretted instrument. It's played by Mac Grgic, and he is going to use a tuning we call Kernberger 2. Now, Kernberger 2 is a well temperament by the most famous student of Johann Sebastian Bach. Kernberg was his only official theory student, though Kernberg is a composer, wonderful. He's a keyboard player. He becomes really close with Frederick the Great's sister. Actually, I think back now what I said earlier. It was Trost the Elder was there for not Frederick the Great's sister, but the first king's sister, not Frederick's sister. Frederick's sister is the one that was friends with Kernberger. So it's a different sister of a different king, but a family member, nonetheless. They owned, as a Prussian entity, Halberstadt. It was sort of their window on the world of Saxony, independent states like Mulhausen. So it's a itchy situation, and that's why the elder came to Kedlingberg for the first time, probably, unless he wanted to see his brother. I'm not sure how close they were, but why do I keep saying brother? Son kills me. Son, sorry. Here we go again. So the son, who takes his place, right? He becomes the new organist in Halberstadt. He more likely went to Halberstadt more often than his father came to Kedlingberg. Anyway, he's the same age as Andreas Werkmeister, the younger. So to say that that Werkmeister studied with somebody his own age doesn't make sense. It's not the German tradition. It's completely unlikely in almost any teaching situation. He'd have to, but I will say this, Andreas Werkmeister saw the treatise that Trost the Younger wrote.
Oh, definitely.
And was obsessed by it. He responds to it.
I mean, you don't do a tuning based on another existing tuning and then go and write about the creator of it in last 4 chapters of your book.
Right. One of the things he did is, you all have heard perhaps of Werkmeister 4, which was the second correct tuning published in Orgelprog in 1681. And we were always trying to figure out why he did it. Because, almost all the other 5 or 6 temperaments of Werkmeister have not been used on organ that we know of. But he had 2 sons, and one of them, Johannes Bartholomeus Werkmeister, lived in Kedlingberg and took over kind of after his father left, and liked the version Werkmeister 4, which was put on the organ for him by one of the famous brothers. These are brothers, organists. But he's basically used to like Forner's tuning, and this is a substitute for Forner. Werkmeister 4 is a substitute for Forner. What it does is it takes G major and it gives it a pure fifth, which makes it all of a sudden, to Werkmeister, usable. So G major is the triumphant, I saved Forner's tuning. It's almost a bone in a way to Forner, but it's not taken as a bone. It's taken as a disparagement, a negative, a pejorative, basically 6. Let me tell you the difference right now. Forner tuning has 6 notes that are from 6 common mean tone, and 6 notes that are microtonal. They're not harmonics at all. There are no harmonic relationships in the temperament of Forner. None. You even have from C to E an equal major third of 400 cents. Yes, you got me there. 400 cents. Look, I'm holding up 4 fingers. That's good. So, equal temperament did not bring in the major third of 400 cents, right? Bumpy. That came in from Forner. Funny little tidbit of history. So now, let's hear Matt Grgic. He's going to play in Kernberger 2, which is almost like Werkmeister 3. I mean, it's got 3 notes different. It's got a just major third from C to E. I sang that earlier, bumpy, only from C to E, though. You don't have it anywhere else. And we'll talk about that again later, actually. It's going to be significant to the last piece that we're going to hear today. But now we're going to hear the Violin Sonata number 1, BWV 1001. So, what's the difference when you hear a guitar in Kernberger 2 and you compare that with the organs and harpsichords and clavichords in Werkmeister 3? Well, Kernberger is 2 generations later, right? He's a student of Bach. Werkmeister died in 1706. So music changed. Music became chords. Kernberger's living in the classical era. So his change of 3 notes from Werkmeister 3 is just so we can hear the C to E as a just interval. That's common to all of his tunings. K1, 2 to 3. K3 is, like I say, it's identical with Werkmeister 3 except for 2 notes, which are close. But you see, you can hear chords and you can imagine chords, even though there are no chords in Bach, right? We said that, counterpoint. But you can imagine, that's ephemera, we can imagine chords that sound better in Kernberger 2. Somebody today in 2022 could say, hey, I like that. It's even better because they like their setup, expecting to hear chords, having a kind of a just relationship. They like that. It's an aesthetic. They can get behind it, but it's irrelevant to what happened in the day of Bach. Totally irrelevant. You know, what matters is what Bach heard in his head, what he got in his productions and what people heard at the time, but not what we like today. What we like today is totally irrelevant to what history says. If it wasn't music, we wouldn't even be pointing that out. But because it's music, we want to like it and think that what we like is what Bach liked, that kind of thing. So there's a lot of, everybody's got their own tuning for Bach. Everybody's got their own. They can figure it out from, doodles at the top of a piece of paper, or from, averaging out everything that's been known to humankind, or, there's so many. I keep hearing new ones, like it's a subset of 31 equal based on the art of the fugue. I mean, that's a new one. And then there's so many people, Barnes, Kellner, they all have their own variants. But Werkmeister 3, which is a name it got because it's on a copper plate that had 6 different tunings on it. The first one was the harmonic series. The second one was quarter comma mean tone. And the third one is
Werkmeister 3.
Right. Some people call it 1 because he didn't use the other 2. I mean, it's so horrible, right? Didn't have a name. We don't have a photograph, a painting, and anything, a silhouette. They used to use silhouettes back then. We don't have even a silhouette of Werkmeister. We don't know what he looked like. And that does a number, I think, on modern people trying to figure out who he was. Most people don't know who he was. I'm so sorry to say that he did that to Forner. I mean, Witold, that's not nice.
That's not nice. And it was a big surprise to find out that he did that.
Right. I mean, if you're interested in Werkmeister and you're proud of what he succeeded in accomplishing, and he learned everything from his family, the Werkmeister family.
Yeah. And you suddenly hear this.
Suddenly? You suddenly hear it?
Yeah, we suddenly hear
That's
this.
very ephemera that you should suddenly hear it. But anyway, let's find another guitar player. So another transcription.
But this time in Werkmeister 3.
Yeah, so it's doable. It's just that Mac, coordinated with John Schneider. And the builder, I think, is Mike Kuderka, who could build anything. I mean, it doesn't matter for him. But, John does like just intonation. And Kernberger, too, might satisfy him in that respect, in that, that sense. I think it satisfied Mac. Grgic, by the way, is spelled Grgc, if you want to find him. All this stuff is available. You can all find it on the internet.
And the names are in the video description, so if you want to take a look.
Righto.
There it is.
So, but now we're going to hear a fellow, though. He's from Turkey. And so his English isn't so good. So my dear friend Tolgahan Kokolu said to me, he doesn't speak English, so he's not going to be able to join us. So I was going to invite him to speak. But he came up with this really beautiful performance of that same last presto that we just heard Mac Grgic do, but he's going to do it on a Werkmeister 3 guitar, which is an invented instrument by Tolga.
Adjustable microtonal guitar.
Yeah, he calls it simply microtonal guitar, but for me that's a little generic. But be that as it may, he's got fretlets, so he can move them fretlet by fretlet. It's a lot of work, but he pushes them into place. It's a different instrument. It can't slide like a modern guitar.
Bend.
So you bend. Yeah, you can't bend the string up.
But
you
you
just
can
take
add
that.
a lot of frets and access
Yes.
incredible.
I've written him a solo piece in 128 using 128 notes from the harmonic series of the 8th octave. He can do it. So, it's interesting that instrument's capable of a lot, but it's its own instrument. So here we're going to hear, if you can set it up and get it ready to go. This is Burlak Akan, A-K-A-N. It's the Bach Presto from the Violin Sonata, number 1, BWV 1001, same piece. And Werkmeister 3, coming from Turkey. So there, I might actually prefer Werkmeister 3 tuning if I can get, to separate the playing, the skill, the actual performance, the room, the pomp. I might actually say I like the Werkmeister because it doesn't land on chords. If I wanted it to land on chords, I might like the Kernberger version. And yet we're still just talking about a transcript. It's even a better way, in a way, to analyze it, right? So it's just a fascinating, Turkey is a microtonal country. And so for Tolgahan to have his own class at the, I think it's in Ankara, the technical college, he has these annual
I think
microtonal
Istanbul.
guitar festivals. Istanbul, is it?
I think so. Yeah.
These microtonal guitar festivals, and here's a winner. This guy, really, it's very impressive. And they're both. I mean, Mac is a brilliant, guitarist. Look, I want to say right now, all these musicians we just heard are brilliant. I mean, myself maybe take out, but everybody else, because that's why I put it on the show, because I thought, these are great proponents. And I want to be able to say, as a performer, not so much anymore, I used to be, you could do anything. You can make the worst, one note sound like gorgeous if you're a great performer. Great performer. I mean, I don't want to get into the detail of how we do it, but there's a charisma, there's something there that they can do that. Then you give them good material like Bach, and that's
even
that
easier. You can polish it even more.
But you need that level, especially when the tuning is going to be unusual. So to get Stamm to be the guy in Waldhausen, there's other organists. You can find other organists. They'll charge you to sit at the organ, but you're not going to play. I mean, there's other organists. Sometimes they play. There's one organist. She's really different kinds of expression. I like a lot of it, but not technically as proficient. There's another fellow. We put his name in the book as an alternative to listen to, but really, Stamm is in a class by himself. I'm starting to think of other names. I don't want to embarrass him if he's going to listen. But so we're kind of at the end here at 11:42. I thought we'd close with we'll start with the beginning of St. Matthew's Passion, the only non-secular piece of the day. And really, when I look at St. Matthew's Passion, this is going to have the storyline in English for those who need it. It's Tone Koopman's second performance of it. He had one earlier in Arato, but then he left the label and he created his own label and produced this with the Amsterdam Chamber Orchestra, which can play pieces in equal temperament or Werkmeister 3. And in this particular case, I think he's got some variant. I kind of came across something that I was involved in 2008. And it's with a fellow named Andreas Spargach. I'm not in touch with him, but he seemed to have known Tone Koopman, who said that he liked that 5/4 major third. I've been singing all through the show today. And that's something that's in Kernberger tuning. That's not in Werkmeister. And it's not in Forner, and it's not in THG Well Temperament. But it's in Kernberger, because that's when music that's like this starts to be like this. It's a different paradigm. Kind of starts in 1750 when Bach dies. What a coincidence. The day after he dies, it starts. And it's not to say there weren't people doing it earlier or later. Baroque doing it. You can do Baroque music in 1760.
It all didn't happen overnight, of course. It was
Right.
like a transition.
But for musicologists to look at it, they want to put it in a group. The Baroque period starts with the death of Bach. And so Kernberger, writing in a different atmosphere, really, where people are writing chords with melodies on top of chords. That's new. It's a new paradigm. It's a new approach to music. So I can understand now. You might want to tweak a Werkmeister 3 note, make it more just. So that's what I think Kernberg is about. But now we're going in the other direction. We've got St. Matthew's Passion. There's already 2 versions of that. One version with 2 organs, one version with organ and harpsichord. And I'm not even sure. I think it's the second version that he's using. And it's the second recording. He did it differently. Now, you can feel the unequalness as opposed to equal as the 2 alternatives. But you can't be sure it's Werkmeister. And I'm not sure it's Kernberg. And I am in touch with the maestro. Just not enough time to talk to him before the show. But I came across this 2008 dialogue between myself and this fellow. And he said he knew tone Koopman and he preferred this C to E as a major third as just at 386 cents, the 5th harmonic. So if you took Werkmeister 3, but you just took the E and you moved it from the position it's in to 386, I think it's what, 7 cents maybe? You can check it. If you do that, everything else is affected, right? It's 12 notes, 1 note is changed. I think that might be the tuning you're going to hear. And I'll let it run for a bit. It'll go over 4 hours, and we'll end it at the end of a particular segment. But it'd be nice to end with music, and it is a little on the religious side, though it's not my taste. I mean, it's too much predictive of the eventual pogroms that followed. But anyway, this is Tone Koopman, St. Matthew's Passion, and you're ready to put it on. Thank you, Witold. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
And thank you, everyone, for watching. And this is something you might want to see on repeat because you get more information every time you hear it. Not from the talking necessarily, but from the sound.
Führten ihn zu dem hohen Priester Kaiphas, dahin die Schriftgelehrten und Ältesten sich versammelt hatten. Petrus aber folgete ihm nach von ferne, bis in den Palast des hohen Priesters, und ging hinein und satzte sich bei die Knechte, auf dass er sähe, wo es hinaus wollte. Die Hohepriester aber und Ältesten und der ganze Rat suchten falsche Zeugnis wider Jesu, auf dass sie ihn töteten, und funden keines. Falsche Zeugen herzutraten, funden sie doch keins. Zuletzt traten herzu 2 falsche Zeugen und sprachen: Er hat gesagt, ich kann den Tempel Gottes erbrechen, in keinen Tag, in denselben Tag, Der hohe Priester stund auf und sprach zu ihm:
Antwortest du nichts zu dem, dass diese wider dich zeugen?
Aber Jesus schwieg stille.
Jesus schweigt zu falschen Lügen still, uns damit zu zeigen, dass sein erbarmensvoller Wille vor uns zum Leiden sei geneigt, und dass wir in dergleichen Pein ihm sollen ähnlich sein und in Verfolgung stille schweigen. falsche Zungen stechen, falsche Zungen stechen. Geduld, Geduld, wenn mich falsche Zungen stechen, falsche Zungen stechen. Schuld, leid ich wieder meine Schuld. Schimpf und Spott, leid ich Schimpf und Spott. So mag der liebe Gott meines Herzens Unschuld der liebe Gott meines Herzens Unschuld rächen. Leid ich wieder meine Schuld, Schimpf und Spott, Schimpf und Spott. Also mag der liebe Gott meines Herzens Unschuld rächen. Wenn mich falsche Zungen stechen, Geduld, Geduld, Geduld.
Der Hohepriester antwortete und sprach zu ihm:
Ich beschwöre dich bei dem lebendigen Gott, dass du uns sagest, ob du seiest Christus, der Sohn Gottes.
Jesus sprach zu ihm:
Du sagest's, doch sage ich euch, von nun an wird's geschehen, dass ihr sehen werdet des Menschensohn sitzen zur Rechten der Kraft und kommen in den Wolken des Himmels.
Da zerriss der Hohepriester seine Kleider und sprach:
Er hat Gott gelästert, was dürfen wir weiter Zeugnis? Siehe, jetzt habt ihr seine Gotteslästerung gehört, was dünket euch?
Sie antworteten und sprachen: Da speierten sie aus in sein Angesicht und schlugen ihn mit Fäusten. Etliche aber schlugen ihn ins Angesicht und sprachen: Petrus aber saß draußen im Palast, und es trat zu ihm eine Magd und sprach:
Und du warst auch mit dem Jesus Galiläer?
Er leugnete aber vor ihnen allen und sprach:
Ich weiß nicht, was du sagest.
Als er aber zur Tür hinausging, sah ihn eine andere und sprach zu denen, die da waren:
Diese war doch mit dem Jesu von Nazareth.
Und er leugnete abermal und schwur dazu:
Ich kenne des Menschen nicht.
Und über eine kleine Weile traten hinzu, die da stunden, und sprachen zu Petro: Da hub er an, sich zu verfluchen und zu schwören:
Ich kenne des Menschen nicht.
Und alsbald krähte der Hahn. Da dachte Petrus an die Worte Jesu, da er zu ihm sagte: Ehe der Hahn krähen wird, wirst du mich dreimal verleugnen.